Hello, and welcome to another edition of TMS TV. I'm here with Angus McIntyre, who is a retired 40-year veteran of BC Hydro and BC Transit and Coast Mountain.
And Metro Transit.
Oh, and Metro Transit. I forgot Metro Transit. So, Angus, you first joined BC Hydro in 1970.
1969.
Oh, 1969. So, what made you want to join BC Hydro and become a bus driver?
Well, since the age of 8 in Windsor, Ontario, when I was allowed to take the bus into town on my own from our neighborhood, a Phaedral twin coach, I was always interested in the bus system and how it worked. And we visited Detroit, where there were still streetcars running. So the exposure to the transit service to me at that time, and trains as well, and streetcars, transportation of all types. That's what really got me going. Our family moved to Australia in 1958 for 5 years, to Melbourne and nearby. So there were steam trains, there were trams, it was just an unlocked my real true interest in transit. So finally, we moved back to Canada, to Windsor, and 2 years later, in 1965, to Vancouver. So I was at Point Grey High School for grade 12, and after that, the British Columbia Transit Society formed, and they had a Brill fan trip in 1966. And I went on that and met all the other transit fans in Vancouver and Victoria at that time. And so eventually, by 1969, I was applying in July, the same time the first man walked on the moon, to be a bus driver. Several of my friends had already done that. They had become bus drivers, and we rode with drivers that we knew, that we were friends with on the transit system, and particularly the Brill trolleys. So that was another aspect to it, was that I already knew people that were doing the job, so I knew what it was all about. And really, I just wanted to drive the Brill trolley. So that age 21, there I was.
So, how soon in training did you get to drive a Brill trolley?
The training period at that time was 4 weeks. There was no air brake course. There was a chauffeur's A badge, which was this badge here, which then authorized you to drive an air brake equipped vehicle and carry passengers. So there was the chauffeur's A, B, and C badges for different types of commercial operation, which later on, when ICBC came in 1974, this became a class 2. And the training then was 6 weeks because the system had grown and things had changed. So about 10 days after we had started training and learned to drive the Phaedral twin coaches, the old Brill diesels, the new look GMs, the fish bowls, and so on, then they said, now here's the trolley bus, right? So having already had an interest in it and getting behind the wheel and pulling out of Oak Ridge for the first time in a 2100, that was to me a great moment, because I'd been behind the wheel unofficially before, but now here I was in training. And
was it everything you thought it would be?
it was,
What was the first turn like as you went on out onto 41st?
well, that we'd already been making turns with the buses, so it felt different because there was so much more power in the Brill trolleys than there was in any of the other buses that we had. So you had to be careful with the power pedal not to, push it down too far.
I'm assuming that 41st was maybe not as busy as it is now, but that was quite the experiences you pulled out of the yard onto your first public road.
And it was a right turn. And at that time, the Oak Ridge College never had an actual traffic signal for like 400 buses to pull out of that yard into the traffic. So motorists knew when the buses started to pull out, they'd usually stop, and you'd pull out and and start your service. So uh, I don't remember where we went for that first Brill trolley ride. I do remember, though, it was westbound, probably down to the Joyce, not Joyce, but to the Camosun Loop at the western end was probably where we first went. And at that time, we had two types of Brills. We had the 2000s, the shorter original ones that had a very different braking system. So they trained us on the large trolleys first, and then they said, okay, now we're going to train you on the T44s, the smaller ones, and the braking system is different. But once you get used to it, they're fine.
And so after that first day, you had no problems coming back for your second day driving a bus?
Well, the very early on, they took us out onto 41st Avenue to show us how long it took to brake the vehicle, because um, your brake pedal, these were large pedals on the Brills. The brake pedal, if you covered the brake pedal while you were coasting or slowing down, instead of having your foot on the power pedal all the time, you had a better chance of stopping quickly. So what they did was they had what they called the detonator test. So on the front bumper of the Brill trolley, they put this device that actually sent gunshots down onto the pavement with chalk marks. And as soon as you heard that, you'd put the brake pedal to the floor and hold it there to make as quick a stop as possible. So they did this twice. The first time when you actually have your foot on the power pedal, and the second time when you were covering the brake pedal. So this was done westbound at Mackenzie and towards Dunbar and so on. 41st had so little traffic at that time at 11 o'clock in the morning. We'd park the bus and walk out in the street and look at the chalk marks, and nobody had vests on or anything. And the people there were used to hearing gunshots late in the morning, because that's where they always did the detonator test.
You became an official bus driver. How soon did you have to make your decision that you would like to drive trolleys rather than diesels or gasoline buses?
Well, it was almost immediate, because when you came out of training, and there were 6 of us in our class, and it was interesting because I was the junior driver of we drew straws to see who would get seniority, because seniority is very important. And so I became the junior driver. And so the instructors, they had set everything up for our training. When we finished the 4 weeks and came out on our own, we were at the bottom of the seniority list. We had no seniority at all. So you ended up essentially doing what no one else wanted to do. You were on the extra board. Because of the timing, I started my training on August 25th, which actually was the weekend of Woodstock. So we were all talking about Woodstock the next day. And a month later, I was out on my own, and we had Friday, Saturday off. They gave our class Friday, Saturday off, which was unusual. They said, "Oh, you're lucky, because those are tough days to work." And so I signed up for the next day, and so I just did little bits of pieces of work to fill in for drivers that were off sick, or that just weren't there. But very quickly, I discovered if you could hold a run for 3 days, even with your small seniority, that run became yours for the rest of the shoot, which was actually right from September right through into December. So it was a long sheet. And I got a notice run for one of the women drivers from the Second World War, Marie. And I did her work with Friday, Saturday off from 4 p.m. till midnight on the Stanley Park Powell Nanaimo run for almost 3 months. And I got to know all her regulars. And that was senior work. Like, she was on for 30 years. She'd been a conductor out on the streetcars and then started to drive the trolleys. And there were still 6 women driving when I started. Edra McLeod was the last. So my break-in and we were still handling money and making change and selling tokens. So to work that evening shift on one of the easier lines in the city was a bonus. So actually, to hold back for 3 days with the little seniority that I had, I think some of the more senior extra men were a little kinder to the new guys, perhaps, and oh, let's let him do this. So uh, I couldn't have started under better circumstances.
So, okay, now you mentioned the extra board, and then we have the spare board, and you mentioned notice runs. Can you maybe just give the viewers a sense of what these various boards are?
Yeah, a notice run was where a driver would be off on compensation for a period of time, um, and there was every indication they would return to work. But they could be off for, say, 6 months, health issues, some other things. So um, a notice run was where they would post this on the extra board, and if you could hold that for 3 days in a row, because every day you'd sign up for the next day's work. If you held that for 3 days in a row and worked it, it was yours for the rest of the sheet. So that was a big plus to have what they call the notice run. Because otherwise, with my low seniority at the bottom of the list, um, every day would have been challenging. And the hours and the range and so on. I didn't have a car when I started until 1970s. So I live near Broadway and Oak, so getting down to the bus garage wasn't too much of a problem. But there was more than once I had to take a taxi to get early enough into the garage because there was no buses running.
So you say we're on the extra board. How does that differ from the spare board?
The spare board and the extra board were the same thing,
Oh,
just a
okay.
different term. When you signed up for a run and you were actually a signed up driver, then that was your work for the 2 to 3 month period of a sheet of the work assignment period. And so you had a um, a period that you could depend on. If you were working the extra board, every day was different because you just never knew what would be available. And the rules for the extra board were quite complicated. Very few systems had an extra board like Vancouver, where the union ran the extra board. So the drivers signed every day for the next day's work. Uh, and I wanted something that was predictable and dependable when I started. So the first sign up, which would have been the beginning of 1970, now I'm at the bottom of the list. So I had a split shift with Tuesday, Wednesday off, and on Gravel Victoria, and so it was easy to break in, particularly since we were handling money and making change um, for evening. So finally, I met Marie because she returned to work, and we both finished at about the same time one evening. And oh, she said, "Oh, I'm so glad to meet you. You took such good care of my people," like her regulars who I got to know as friends. So